fellow learners, and welcome to the 55th lecture in this NPTEL course on 20th century poetry. We have been discussing the life and work of Sylvia Plath for quite some time, and I had promised to wrap up this discussion in the previous lecture, but unfortunately our discussion took longer. And now in this lecture, we will conclude our study of Sylvia Plath. I had read through the poem titled The Colossus and begun with a commentary on that. I will continue that discussion right now. And after The Colossus, I will read Daddy, which will be the final poem in our study of Sylvia Plath. So, The Colossus, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, signifies a shift in the tone of Plath's writing in the wake of the absence of her father. The word Colossus signifies that shift. It refers to the action as well as the size. And the definition, which I have taken from a standard dictionary of the Colossus, refers to a person or thing of great size, influence, or ability. And one example of that, or the instance of the use of this word in a sentence, can be so-and-so has been described as the creative colossus of the literary world. The word colossus signifies both a quality and an action. It describes both the being of something that is big, great size, and also the wielding of one's bigness, as it were, through acts of domination and control. The figure of Plath's father is understood to be both size-wise, big in terms of size, but also big and dominating in terms of its activity. This is the first impression that the Colossus gives in this poem. I'll briefly read through the first stanza because it contains an important idea. I shall never get you put together entirely, pieced, glued, and properly jointed. Mule bray, pig grunt, and body cackles proceed from your great lips. It's worse than a barnyard. And I'll continue reading the second stanza as well. Perhaps you consider yourself an oracle, mouthpiece of the dead, or of some god or other. 30 years now I have labored to dredge the silt from your throat. I am none the wiser. So the poem begins with a description of the poet and the speaker's ongoing struggle with a problem, and the idea that despite this ongoing struggle, the poet and speaker have failed to achieve what they need and desire, which is a sort of closure. I have mentioned before, I've quoted from Plath's journals and her comments in various interviews, where she's described the contradictory feelings towards her father, who was an autocrat, and she often wished he was dead. And her long struggle with these feelings, with these opposing feelings, given the fact that he died when she was 10. So the struggle that the speaker of these poems describes continues. And in this poem, the struggle changes a little bit because this is the poem in which we can begin to see a change in the direction in which the poet and speaker direct their energies, their emotional energies, words and feelings of anger. Earlier, the direction in which the poet and speaker sent these energies were inward. But beginning with the Colossus, we see that the speaker of these poems sends their anger and grief towards the figure of the dead father. The key intellectual frame for understanding this shift is given to us by the psychologist and the psychiatrist named Melanie Klein, who describes how mourners must go through the pain of re-establishing and reintegrating their childhood images of their parents. Klein describes this process in these words. In normal mourning, the individual reintrojects and reinstates his or her loved parents who are felt to be his good inner objects. His inner world, the one which he has built up from his earliest days onwards, in this fantasy was destroyed when the actual loss occurred. The rebuilding of this inner world characterizes the successful work of mourning. This is a fairly self-explanatory and very self-evident statement. The loss of a parent leads to the destruction of a world, and the way in which a person can cope with this loss is by rebuilding the world which was lost. In Plath's poem, we can see that if we read these poems as they were, as the poet's effort to rebuild that world, the poet's attempt to mourn and grieve for the loss of her father, then we can see how the speaker of these poems tries multiple times but fails to achieve something resembling the restoration of that comfortable, secure, safe world. In fact, the more the poet tries to establish that world, the more the poet seems to be pulled away from that safe space. The father in this poem we see is scattered, and literally scattered, as we saw in Full Fathom 5 and in Electra on Azalea Path. Here too we see a scattering of the figure of the father. Such scattering means that the daughter is condemned to an endless and futile work of gathering, rebuilding, but this process, because it doesn't end, it leads to a further scattering, which leads to the daughter being sent scrambling again. So the process of mourning, which should culminate in a successful rebuilding of a world, is extended almost indefinitely. And this is because the daughter cannot identify what it is in the discourse of the father that she would like to disagree with. So there is a struggle to communicate, to figure out what it is that she must say or think in order to revisit a memory and to reinterpret it so that it loses its power to sting. So to again recall the interview that Plath gave, in which she described wishing her father dead multiple times as a child, and thinking that when he finally passed away from an illness when she was only a child of 10, she felt that he had obliged her by doing that, and she believed that she had caused it to happen by wanting it so much. This is a source of regret, and the process of grieving must involve a process of revisiting the multiple memories in which Otto Plath appeared to be an autocrat and drove the young child that Sylvia Plath was to wish for his death mistakenly. So the grieving adult must undertake a process of remembering, which must first acknowledge and demonstrate the autocratic nature of Otto Plath. It would also need to demonstrate the child's reaction to such a perceived autocratic nature as a mistaken desire for the father's death. And finally, it must also reconcile this mistaken desire for the father's death with the adult poet's understanding that even though it was mistaken, there was something legitimate, there was something quite right about the child wanting something unpleasant. So it is a heavy burden that the adult poet carries. The grieving, mourning poet needs to reconcile these opposing tendencies. And in order to carry this heavy burden, the first minimum requirement is that the poet remember, that the poet piece together, put the fragments back into the whole, as if a glass vase has been shattered, and the poet must take these broken pieces and put them together in a way that they can be restored, and the vase which was shattered can take the form it had before it broke. So this task is important, but this task proves impossible. This is what the poem describes. It describes how Plath and the adult speaker cannot figure out what her father was. The word barnyard noises describes the confusion, the fragmentation, and the disparate nature of the memories that she has. And in those memories, the things that he said. So the Colossus is fragmented. And for that reason, it is much more overwhelming and dominating a Colossus. This is the contradiction of the poem. Plath figures her inability to totalize the scattered memories and contradictory feelings that she has in the absence of her father. If only she could communicate, that is, if only she could describe and put together a narrative that restored that image, that memory. If she could do that, she could put together what it was that haunted her. In other words, if she could piece together an accurate, factually accurate picture of her father, she could reconcile herself with the fact that he was not actually an autocrat, and yet there was something in his behavior which made her, the young child, feel that he was an autocrat. So that reconciliation, that clarification does not happen, and it seems to be infinitely deferred. Through an act of memory, Plath might eventually move on from the traumatic experience, an experience that resists being identified as a memory. So the experience resists Plath, and she's chasing that experience in order to make it a memory, in order to make it a memory that clarifies what she was and what she is now. And that clarification will allow her to continue the process of grieving in a way that doesn't cause her pain. So Plath the poet and Sylvia the daughter both stage a struggle. The struggle is to describe in the right words exactly what it is that needs to be let go, and to remember the father in his completeness. If this can be done, the process of grieving can proceed without pain and achieve its true reconciliatory function. To understand this, I'll quote Klein again. When hatred of the lost, loved object gets the upper hand in the mourner, this not only turns the loved lost person into a persecutor, but also shakes the mourner's belief in his good inner objects as well. The shaken belief in the good objects disturbs most powerfully the process of idealization. So we can see this contradiction described with great accuracy and detail in this poem, The Colossus. There are some stock images of the sun rising, which are reversed in this image. Typically, in an elegy, the sun rising reconciles the speaker to the death and the loss of the person who has recently passed away. In this poem, the sun is situated under the pillar of the dead father's tongue. This shows how the poet, the mourner, is trapped and condemned to a world defined by his death. So the message is that she must ever lament a father she detests too much to allow him a rebirth, and she must ever chastise herself for her ambivalence toward the dead man. So psychologically, this poem describes a failure and a tragedy. But its greatness is that while it describes this psychological failure, it describes a poetic and an aesthetic triumph. In fact, it may even be said that the poetic triumph emerges from the psychological failure. This poem is a demonstration of what in 20th century poetry, English poetry, we can call the poetics of melancholia. It is a resistance to the traditional form of the elegy in which consolation happens through substitution. The speaker is mourning the loss of someone who has passed away, and the poem consoles the speaker, by substituting the dead person, by providing a substitute for the dead person in a natural sight like the sun rising or flowers or other examples of nature that renews itself at a faster rate than human beings. We come to an end of the discussion of the Colossus, and we will now move to a poem titled Daddy, which is among the most famous poems of the 20th century and also most widely read, and also justifiably so because it has a unique power. This poem will culminate and complete our discussion of Sylvia Plath because it also allows us to revisit several aspects of Plath's life and career. It also represents a culmination of the poetic inquiry that we have been tracking into the understanding of father's death, understanding of the grief that this death produced, understanding the poetic inspiration that this person enabled, and also understanding emotional toll that this death and the unsuccessful, infinitely extended period of mourning has taken on the poet. So now, this is Daddy by Sylvia Plath. You do not do any more black shoe, in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, poor and white, barely daring to breathe or achoo. So the words do, shoe, and achoo will be repeated as a rhyme throughout the poem. In fact, the poem will replace all of these words that end with an U sound or an oo sound with the word you. And as the poem ends, it will become more and more accusatory. Lines will start ending more and more frequently with the word you. And you, as we can tell, rhymes with each of these words. The first stanza also indicates one of the linguistic registers that the poet will use. Daddy, black shoe, you do not do. It has a almost very simplistic nursery school style of rhyme. And that's one of the poetic strategies taken by the poet, that she is describing a young child, a girl missing her father, looking for her father. But this is not a simplistic mimicry of that tone. In fact, it is a staging of the journey that the poet has undertaken. That at one point, the poet was that young girl child. Now she is no longer that. And she has come much further from that stage. Right? So the next stanza goes, Daddy, I have had to kill you. You died before I had time. Marble heavy, a bag full of God, ghastly statue with one grey toe, big as a Frisco seal, and a head in the freakish Atlantic where it pours bean green over blue. In the waters of beautiful Nauset, I used to pray to recover you, Ach du. So the word you has been introduced in the first line of the second stanza, and it will be repeated with increasing frequency, increasing emphasis, and increasing intensity. The accusations will increase, the anger with which those accusations are made will increase. So the poem is slowly getting into its gear now. A few things to note. The first two lines of the second stanza are operating on different time scales. When the poet says that she has had to kill Daddy, she is referring to a different time scale from the time scale in which he passed away. The second line refers to the historical past, the time when Otto Plath passed away, as I mentioned, from a gangrene infection which led to an amputation of his leg, which in turn was caused by an advanced case of diabetes. This historical event was different from the historical frame in which the poet says she has had to kill him. What does it mean that she has had to kill him? It means that she has had to revisit the moment of his death, and she has had to revisit his memories in the many years that have passed since his death. It is because of the kind of memories that she had that she has had to reinterpret, remember, and clarify to herself exactly what his life meant at the time that he passed away. So, when the poet says that she has had to kill him, she is actually referring to the effort that she has had to undertake in order to reinterpret both his life and the meaning of that life for the poet as she has grown, as she has begun writing, and as she has developed her career as a poet. One grey toe refers to gangrene, refers to the changing color of skin that happens when tissues start dying because of the lack of blood circulation. And finally, the words that end the second stanza, Ach du, refers to the language German. The poet incorporates words from the German language in this English poem, and the goal here is to signify some of the ideologies, some of the power dynamics that the German language brought forward in the English poem. And this was written in the 1960s, barely a decade or two after the end of the Second World War, when the entire world was horrified by the war crimes and the crimes against humanity which were inflicted by the German Third Reich against the Jews, the Holocaust. So the German words here, and especially the meter and the tone in which they are used, signifies a militaristic, dominating, overwhelming, and powerful presence. And for the poet, the identity, the German origins of Otto Plath will combine with the autocratic and fascistic nature of his personality, especially the way he is remembered after he passed away. The poem goes on. In the German tongue, in the Polish town, scraped flat by the roller of wars, 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 but the name of the town is common. My Polack friend says there are a dozen or two, so I could never tell where you put your foot, your root. I could never talk to you. The tongue stuck in my jaw. So she is referring to a history, a transcontinental history of the immigration of the Plath family from Germany to the United States. And the Otto Plath's life is also very interesting because he planned to return to Germany and join the family profession as a lawyer. But once he came to study in the United States, he got more interested in different fields, especially science and the arts, and he decided to give up that study. As a result, he was cut off from his family inheritance and was forced to start a new life and a new family in the United States. He got a job as a professor and settled in Massachusetts. Boston University was the place where Otto Plath got a job as a professor. And this immigrant life is very typical of the 20th century. It also anticipates the immigrant journey that Sylvia Plath would undertake as an adult. After her bachelor's from Smith College, Plath would go to study at Cambridge University as a Fulbright scholar, where she would meet her future husband, Ted Hughes, and start a family in England. So these two immigrant journeys are paralleled, and the more Plath may try to separate herself from her father, the more she is connected to him. She tries to articulate his language, but the language gets stuck in her throat. And the point here she's making is that languages emerge from histories of what people do to each other. And the German that she inherits and tries to speak as a way of connecting with her father, unfortunately has all of the connotations of Nazism and fascism in the second half of the 20th century. So history makes its presence felt in the interaction between two human beings. Further, she writes, I could hardly speak. I thought every German was you, and the language obscene, an engine, shoving me off like a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen. I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may well be a Jew. So this phrase and this stanza has been criticized by several scholars, especially George Steiner. The scholar Steiner argues that this is an instance of an appropriation and a somewhat disingenuous use of the Holocaust by a poet who has had no direct personal experience of the Holocaust. While Steiner's critique is legitimate, it is not the best way or most profitable way to read this stanza. The stanza is less about how Plath is comparing herself to that of a Jew who is shipped off to a concentration camp. Rather, this paragraph is about how the language German exerts a forward momentum and a somewhat mechanical and somewhat militaristic momentum, like the movement of a train, and especially those trains which were quite indifferent, inhuman, and quite violent, which carried Jews who were selected and sent off to concentration camps. Further, the poet writes, the snows of the Tyrol, the clear beer of Vienna, are not very pure or true. With my gypsy ancestress and my weird luck, and my Tarok pack, I may be a bit of a Jew. The Tarok pack refers to documents which Plath's husband, Ted Hughes, had offered to her as a way of studying and developing one's interest in the gypsies in 20th century England. So there was some connection between the gypsies and the Jews, and Plath is drawing on those connections here. The poet continues, I have always been scared of you with your Luftwaffe, your gobbledygoo, and your neat moustache and your Aryan eye, bright blue, Panzerman, oh you. Panzer and Luftwaffe refers to planes and tanks that were used by the Axis or the German fascist forces in the Second World War. Again, the association with fascism, the association with a masculine military domination of the world, all of these associations connect in the memory of this of the speaker to the memory of her father. Panzerman, her father becomes the man who is symbolized by the German tank. Right? Further, the poet continues, not God, but the swastika, so black no sky could squeak through. Every woman adores a fascist. The boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. This is an instance of irony and sarcasm where the speaker demonstrates how at one point, out of a desire to make herself more acceptable, more desirable, and more obedient, and therefore more conducive to receiving the memories and the affections of her father, she had internalized certain beliefs that had no basis in reality, but were actually the consequence and the manifestation of a male chauvinistic view. An example of such a view is this line, every woman adores a fascist. Fascism often justified itself by claiming itself to be efficient, by claiming itself to be something that got the job done, that was practical, that did not waste time in opinions or indecision or emotional confusion and so on. And there's the feminine or the womanly nature is here contrasted against this fascist, practical, and efficient nature. This is, of course, not true, and here the poet is giving voice in a sarcastic and ironic vein to a belief that she forced herself to hold in order to make her process of grieving undergo more smoothly. But she does not believe in it, and she is quite angry with herself for believing that she might have wanted something like this. She continues, "You stand at the blackboard, Daddy, in the picture I have of you, a cleft in your chin instead of your foot, but no less a devil for that, no, not any less the black man who bit my pretty red heart in two." So now, in this stanza, Plath describes the picture of Otto Plath. There's a famous picture of Otto Plath taken while he was a professor at Boston University. And if you go to the Wikipedia page of Otto Plath, that is the picture you'll find there. This is a picture in which we can see a cleft in the chin of this person. And she compares this picture to that of Ted Hughes, who also was a man of language and ideas, a man of letters, and who also has been pictured on multiple occasions in professorial attire like tweed suits and cleft chins. And here Plath argues that this figure was no less of a devil than the black man who has now bit her pretty red heart in two. So now in this stanza, the two figures are conflated. Otto Plath and Ted Hughes are conflated. And Plath will return to this conflated composite picture of these two men a little bit later. But before that, she gives us some more details. She gives us details of her life and how her life is played out after the death of her father. "I was 10 when they buried you. At 20, I tried to die and get back to you. I thought even the bones would do, but they pulled me out of the sack and they stuck me together with glue. And then I knew what to do. I made a model of you, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look." So Plath returns to the conflated composite image of this man combined and made of these two figures, one of her husband and one of her father, but she provides the emotional foundation for that by describing her lifelong challenges with mental health. She connects this also with the fact that she lost her father when she was 10. She says, "At 20, I tried to die." This is indeed referring to the first suicide attempt that Sylvia Plath had made. This was following the electrocution therapy that she had received while she was an undergraduate at Smith College in Massachusetts. She describes here that she attempted suicide the first time because she wanted to get back to her father, who she had lost, who had passed away when she was 10. She says that she thought even the bones would do. But then she says, "They pulled me out of the sack." This also is a reference to how she was discovered. She was discovered in her mother's house when she had taken her mother's sleeping pills and she had hidden inside her mother's closet. Closet with its clothes refers to the sack here. "They stuck me together with glue." The sentence refers to the incompetence or the lack of knowledge of physical and mental health at the time, and especially especially towards the kind of half knowledge with which a lot of women and especially female patients or individuals who had challenges with mental health were treated. And then she says, "And then I knew what to do. I made a model of you, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look." So she says that her choice of Ted Hughes as a husband also emerged from her lifelong struggle and her lifelong struggle to get back to her father and the mental health challenges which that unfulfilled desire had produced in her. And she refers to both Hughes and Otto Plath as fascistic men, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look. The love of the rack and the screw. The love of the rack and the screw refers to Hughes's multiple affairs, multiple extramarital affairs, and the rack refers to drinking. And The poet says, I said, I do, I do. So, Daddy, I'm finally through. So, by identifying the conflation of Otto Plath with Ted Hughes, the poet comes to a conclusion that she has reached a closure, or she has achieved a closure of sorts. She argues that the black telephone is off at the root. The voices just can't worm through. Here she is referring to both the lack of connection between her adult self and her dead father, and also the lack of connection between the two members of this estranged marriage. This poem was written in the year after they had separated. The divorce, the technical aspects of the divorce was still waiting to be resolved. But at the point that she was writing this, they had separated. She had separated from Ted Hughes. She continues, and we'll wrap up very soon. Plath continues, if I've killed one man, I've killed two. The vampire who said he was you and drank my blood for a year, 7 years if you want to know. Daddy, you can lie back now. She describes Ted Hughes as being a vampiric partner. In the classical myth, a vampire sustains himself by drinking the blood of innocent strangers. In this case, Ted Hughes is described as a vampire because, emotionally speaking, he sucked the emotional energies of Sylvia Plath. And this is something that Plath describes in great detail, and it is quite painful to read in her unabridged journals. The abridged versions of which, again, Ted Hughes suppressed and did not allow for full publication while he was alive. She then describes the exact time that she had remained married to Ted Hughes as 7 years. This was the 7th year of their marriage in which they finally separated. And then she tells Daddy that this figure of her dead father, he can lie back now. He can lie back now because his absence, the painful lack of resolution, the painful struggle of appreciating and remembering him accurately, that no longer has any more implication. It no longer causes any more discomfort because the poet is now dealing with something else. Those problems have compounded and took on the shape of other problems. The poet then concludes, and this is the final stanza, there's a stake in your fat black heart, and the villagers never liked you. They are dancing and stamping on you. They always knew it was you. Daddy, daddy, you bastard, I'm through. So this word, the bastard, is used in a way that can shock many readers. In fact, it was the first time that a poet uses this word to refer to her father, and a figure with whom the poet is to whom the poet is attached very strongly. This was far beyond any of the radical and courageous and confrontational styles of elegies and family elegies which had become popular in the 20th century. As I mentioned, Plath was inspired by Robert Lowell's poem about his father, but Plath goes much further. So we have read through this poem. I will conclude our summation and discussion of Plath in the next lecture. Thank you.